Barsky asked me to talk about AA for a little bit, so I'm just gonna, I guess, talk about my entire process of making the IA, and I guess my thought process along the way, and some of like the considerations I had and the reasons I did things I did. I think I don't know how far you guys are into the IA process. I think you guys have started picking your topics. I don't remember what it was honestly when I picked my topic. Um, but if you guys haven't, or if you guys have, my only advice about picking topic is pick something you're interested in, and then you can change it down the line. Like you don't have to start off with something that you know exactly that's like super specific. You can change it and like evolve it a bit down the line if you see something very interesting or you find that your initial idea doesn't work. And that's what I did. So my initial IA was so this is my final one. It has vocabulary of English speakers become smaller over time, and my initial one was how has the frequency distribution of letters in the English language changed over time? So you can kind of tell they're somewhat related. They're both based on linguistics or like English language, and they're both talking about how it's changed over time. But the thing it's studying that's changed is different. Because I initially was doing collecting data for the frequency one. You guys don't really need to understand what that means, but essentially it became clear that the IA wasn't really doable. Like I'd be able to collect the data, I'd be able to collect the math, but there's very little real world application to it. Like I'm not really able to draw any actual like real world related conclusions from the data. So it became just doing a math problem and not really an exploration of some real event. So that's why I changed it. I changed it to word frequency or vocabulary. And that's a lot more relatable. I could talk about, how people say, like the kids these days, all they know is talking slang and whatever. Um, so yeah, I'm able to relate it to like more realistic stuff. And then if you're able to do that, I think the IA becomes considerably easier to do as well. Especially, it really helps out this aim and approach section. I think for some different IAs, the aim and approach is very straightforward. But for mine, the thing I'm trying to study, like vocabulary over time, is really it's really vague, right? What it really is vocabulary. Is it just the number of words in the language? Um, Essentially, it's very hard to define. And that's what I talk about in my aim and approach. It's all in my aim and approach. There's very little actual math, right? You see numbers, but there's no actual equations. There's no calculations, essentially. Because there's no data. There's nothing for me to calculate. I'm just talking about how I approach my problem and how I'm collecting data and the math I'll be using and why I'll be using that math. It's really relating, like making the reader understand why are you doing this math and what is like the reader should be able to kind of interpret the results of your calculations without reading your conclusion. At least in my opinion, that's like how I was thinking about it. They should be able to. They understand your problem. They understand what you're trying to look for. Um, and then my aim and approach, what I did is essentially my challenge is what data am I collecting, and I just listed I think two potential approaches and talked about like advantages, disadvantages of each, and then I chose one and just explained why I chose it. And this is also another thing that I did that I thought was that I did like a lot was I in my aim and approach I added a proof, and I think proofs are something that are like very difficult to fit into your IA. There's not many places for a proof, right? But in my aim and approach, I was able to fit one in, basically saying this approach is different from another approach. Here's the mathematical proof to show that it's different. Um, so yeah, it's essentially like using math to prove your logic. And so it's just a place to fit in a different type of math. Because in your like analysis part or data collection in your analysis, it's probably going to be some sort of statistics or calculus, or maybe geometry, there's not really many places you can take it. So proofs and stuff is, I feel like, very difficult to fit in. At least in some of the other topics I was thinking of doing initially, no idea how to fit in a proof. Um, so yeah, I think the aim and approach is a hugely important thing, and it's also not just important for the reader; it's important for you. I think if you very, very clearly define what you're looking for and what the problem is, it makes the whole process so much easier. Um, and even though like I say that, it's very important. That's not the chronologically. That's not what I did. I kind of had a rough idea of how I wanted to do my AA. I just wanted something related to words and time, right? So then I actually collected the data first, and then did my analysis, and then kind of found interesting stuff about the analysis. I was like, okay, this way of collecting data doesn't actually work. I'm gonna go back and revise it. And I did that a few times, and that's how I came up with my aim and approach section of the IA, which ended up being a huge section of the workout, and probably I think the part I did best out of my IA. So yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's really no set way to do it. You just kind of, uh, it's okay to do a bit of trial and error. I did a lot of that with topics, with my aim and approach, and then I think the important thing is you explain to the reader your different trials and errors, and then from there you put that in your IA. They're able to like better understand your problem as like why this approach doesn't work and why that approach doesn't work and why you chose your final approach. But yeah, anyways, that's all I have to say really. I think that was a pretty confusing video, but as far as she knows what she's doing, just listen to her. I don't know if she'd want this, but I'll share this with her if she wants to read it or whatever. Oh, she has access to this. Yeah. But yeah, that's it.